A big moment this weekend at Lakewood Church as a new generation begins to take center stage. Jonathan Osteen spoke at Saturday and Sunday services. He is the son of Joel and Victoria Osteen.
What happens when the son of one of the most powerful pastors in the world starts questioning everything his father built? At Lakewood Church, Jonathan Osteen shocked everyone when his words began to challenge long-held teachings about faith, wealth, and obedience. What started as a sermon quickly turned into a family and church-wide conflict. And as tensions rise behind closed doors, one question spreads everywhere. Is Jonathan revealing truth or destroying a legacy? The moment everything started falling apart. The atmosphere inside Lakewood Church felt different the moment Jonathan Osteen stepped off the stage. What was expected to be another uplifting message quickly turned into something no one was prepared for. Instead of the usual comfort and encouragement, his words carried weight, sharp, thought-provoking, and unsettling for many in the audience. At first, people tried to process what they had just heard. Some sat frozen, still holding their Bibles tightly, while others quietly exchanged confused glances. A few even left without saying a word, as if they needed distance from what had just been said. Because this wasn't just another sermon. It felt like a shift, something breaking beneath the surface. And inside the massive walls of Lakewood Church, that shift did not go unnoticed. Behind the scenes, Joel Osteen was immediately informed about what happened. The reaction from the congregation wasn't just mixed, it was divided. For a ministry built on unity, hope, and prosperity teachings, Jonathan's message landed like a shockwave. Joel didn't rush to respond publicly. Instead, he went straight to his office, alone with his thoughts. For years, he had carefully built a message that inspired millions. But now, the unexpected challenge was coming from someone closest to him, his own son. And that made everything more complicated, because this wasn't just about disagreement. It was about legacy. That evening, father and son finally faced each other in a private conversation. The tension was immediate, heavy, unspoken, and impossible to ignore. Joel questioned Jonathan's intentions, trying to understand what pushed him to speak in a way that directly unsettled the foundation of their church's message. But Jonathan didn't back down. Instead, he stood firm. He argued that faith had slowly been reshaped into something incomplete, something overly focused on blessings, success, and comfort, while ignoring endurance, sacrifice, and spiritual depth. For Jonathan, the message had drifted away from its original meaning. He pointed to Scripture, referencing struggles, trials, and the early believers who endured suffering rather than constant prosperity. His message wasn't rebellion in his eyes, it was correction. But Joel saw it differently. To him, Jonathan wasn't just questioning teachings. He was risking the stability of a global ministry that millions depended on for hope. A single shift in message could change everything, and neither of them was willing to fully step back. As the conversation grew heavier, another presence quietly felt the impact. Sophia Hahn, Jonathan's wife. She had been in the audience earlier, watching the reaction unfold in real time. She saw the confusion, the discomfort, and the growing tension that followed them home. That night, she tried to speak gently to Jonathan, not to silence him, but to make him see the consequences. She reminded him that every choice now carried weight beyond himself, his family, his marriage, his father's legacy, the entire church community watching closely. But Jonathan's conviction didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. He believed stepping back from his message would mean compromising truth, and to him, that wasn't an option. Sophia fell silent for a moment, torn between love and fear. She could see his certainty, but also the storm forming around him. Meanwhile, inside Lakewood Church, something bigger was beginning to unfold. Leaders started whispering. Conversations turned into concern. Concern turned into urgency, because what Jonathan said wasn't fading away. It was spreading, and the church now faced a question no one was ready to answer. Was this a misunderstanding, or the beginning of a fracture that couldn't be repaired. And by the next Sunday, Jonathan Osteen would step back into the pulpit, bringing a message that would push everything even further. A father forced into a difficult position. Lakewood Church felt different the moment Sunday service began. There was no usual warmth in the atmosphere, no light energy of expectation. Instead, there was hesitation, like the entire congregation was still carrying the weight of what had happened the week before. Jonathan Osteen was back on the pulpit, and this time, the silence that greeted him felt heavier than before. He stood calmly, but the room was watching him differently now, not just as a pastor's son, but as someone whose words were beginning to shift the direction of the entire church. He started with familiar themes: faith, kindness, generosity. The kind of message people were used to hearing at Lakewood. For a brief moment, it felt like things were going back to normal, but that feeling didn't last. Slowly, his tone shifted. Jonathan began speaking about giving, a core tradition deeply tied to the church's identity. But instead of reinforcing it, he started questioning how it had been understood for years. He challenged the idea that generosity should be tied to expectation, that giving should never feel like a transaction between faith and blessings. According to him, true generosity should come from sincerity, not from the belief that something greater must be returned. And just like that, the atmosphere changed. People looked around, unsure if they were hearing him correctly. Some froze in place, while others began to visibly shift in their seats. A few quietly stood up and walked out, unable to stay through what they were hearing. Because this wasn't just a different interpretation anymore. It felt like a direct challenge to long-standing beliefs, and it was spreading through the room in real time. By the time the sermon ended, the reaction had already begun to grow far beyond the church walls. Clips of Jonathan's message started circulating online within hours. Social media exploded with debate. Some praised him for speaking boldly about what they saw as uncomfortable truth, calling him courageous, refreshing, and unafraid to question tradition. But others saw something entirely different. They accused him of disrespecting the foundation his father built, of creating confusion within a global congregation, and of crossing a line that should never have been crossed publicly. The church was no longer just a place of worship in this moment. It had become the center of a national conversation. And behind closed doors, the tension only grew stronger. Inside Lakewood's leadership, discussions turned urgent. What started as concern had now shifted into pressure to respond, to control the narrative, and to protect the stability of the church. Some leaders believed Jonathan was becoming too influential to ignore. Others feared that any harsh action would only fuel more division. But one truth was becoming impossible to avoid. The situation was no longer contained. Even Joel Osteen found himself pulled deeper into the conflict once again, not just as a leader trying to protect the church, but as a father watching his son stand at the center of growing controversy. Every direction felt wrong. Every decision carried consequences. And at home, the tension didn't stay outside the door anymore. Sophia Hahn could feel it too. The strain, the silence, the weight of something that was no longer just a disagreement, but a breaking point, forming in real time. Jonathan, however, didn't step back. He believed what he was saying needed to be said, no matter the cost. But what he didn't realize was that the next gathering inside Lakewood Church wouldn't just be another discussion. It would be a decision point, and everything was about to move toward consequences no one could reverse. Inside, the heated Osteen family clash. The tension inside the Osteen family didn't stay inside the church. It followed them home. What was once a private family relationship was now under public pressure, shaped by sermons, reactions, and growing controversy that refused to die down. And at the center of it all stood Jonathan Osteen, unwilling to step back from what he believed was truth. Joel Osteen, meanwhile, found himself in a position he never expected, not just as a church leader trying to protect a global ministry, but as a father watching his son become the most divisive voice inside his own congregation. Every conversation between them felt heavier than the last. When they spoke privately, it wasn't loud arguments. It was controlled tension, the kind where every word carried weight. Joel tried to understand Jonathan's perspective, but at the same time, he couldn't ignore the growing impact on the church and its members.
Here, every week, it feels like someone comes up and tells me they remember when I was only this tall.
Jonathan stayed firm. He believed the message he was sharing was necessary, even if it challenged long-standing beliefs. To him, faith had become too comfortable, too focused on success, and too disconnected from struggle. And he refused to stay silent just to preserve harmony. That conviction made him unshakable, but it also widened the gap between them. Sophia Hahn watched it all unfold from the middle of the storm. She saw the shift in tone, the emotional distance growing between husband and father, and the increasing pressure building from every direction. She tried to speak to Jonathan gently, reminding him that conviction without compromise could come at a cost too heavy to carry. But Jonathan didn't waver. To him, backing down meant betraying something deeper than family expectations. It meant abandoning his purpose. That answer didn't bring peace. It only made the divide clearer. Outside their home, the situation was getting worse. Church members were now openly choosing sides. Some saw Jonathan as courageous, someone finally speaking uncomfortable truth. Others saw him as reckless, even dangerous, to the unity of Lakewood Church. Social media debates intensified the pressure even more, turning a private conflict into a public spectacle. And with every passing day, Joel felt the responsibility tightening around him. The church was demanding clarity. The leadership wanted direction. And the situation was no longer something that could be ignored or delayed. Because what started as a disagreement had now turned into something much bigger. A conflict that was no longer just about interpretation, but about identity, authority, and the future of the church itself. And inside the next leadership discussion, a new question was about to rise, one that would force everyone to choose a side. Because what came next inside Lakewood Church would push the conflict past the point of no return. Jonathan Osteen defends his beliefs. By the time Jonathan Osteen stepped back into the pulpit again, the atmosphere inside Lakewood Church had already changed. What used to feel like a place of unity now felt divided, like every seat carried an unspoken opinion waiting to surface. And Jonathan knew it, but instead of slowing down, he leaned further into his message. This time, there was no easing in, no gradual build-up. From the moment he began speaking, it was clear that his focus had shifted toward the very foundation of what the church had long stood for. He addressed the growing discomfort directly, not with anger, but with conviction. Jonathan spoke about how faith, in his view, had been misunderstood over time. He explained that it should not be measured by financial success, comfort, or visible blessings. Instead, he emphasized humility, service, and the ability to remain faithful even in hardship. For some in the audience, it felt like clarity, like a message they had been waiting to hear but never expected from inside Lakewood itself. But for others, it felt like a line being crossed again. The room was split in real time. Some listened carefully, deeply engaged. Others sat back, visibly tense, as if each word was pulling the church further apart. Jonathan continued anyway. He referenced scripture to support his message, pointing to themes of sacrifice, endurance, and spiritual struggle. His tone remained steady, but there was an intensity beneath it now, like he understood exactly what was at stake, but refused to retreat. And that refusal only deepened the divide. Online reactions exploded again almost instantly. Clips of his sermon spread quickly, drawing millions of views and thousands of comments from both supporters and critics. To his supporters, Jonathan was becoming a voice of reform, someone willing to challenge a system they believed had drifted too far from its roots. To his critics, he was becoming a disruption, someone risking the stability of a global ministry built over decades. Inside Lakewood Church, leadership discussions became even more urgent. The tension was no longer just about interpretation. It was about control, unity, and whether Jonathan's presence in the pulpit was helping or harming the church's future. Joel Osteen once again found himself in the center of it all, not just as a pastor managing a congregation, but as a father watching the distance between belief and responsibility grow wider than ever. And at home, Sophia Hahn could feel that distance too. The conversations were getting harder, the silence heavier, and the emotional strain impossible to ignore. Because what was once a theological disagreement was now turning into something much larger. A decision was coming, one that could no longer be delayed or softened. And as the leadership prepared for another closed-door meeting, one question began to echo louder than the rest. How far could this conflict go before something finally broke? And inside that next meeting, Lakewood Church would be forced to make a choice that would change Jonathan's future forever. Caught between love and conviction. The tension inside Lakewood Church had reached a boiling point. Inside a quiet, locked conference room, Joel Osteen sat across from his son, Jonathan, and top church leaders. The air was thick with anticipation and unspoken emotions. What began as disagreements over interpretation had evolved into a full-blown crisis threatening the church's stability and the family's unity. Senior leaders spoke first, voices heavy with urgency. They laid out their concerns. Jonathan's sermons were causing division, unsettling the congregation and challenging the very teachings the church had upheld for decades. They warned that ignoring the situation could spiral into chaos, undermining years of careful work. Jonathan listened, calm, steady, unflinching. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't waver. His words were clear, firm, and unapologetic. Faith, he insisted, was never meant to be measured by wealth or comfort. True devotion wasn't transactional. It was about humility, sacrifice, and service. His voice carried conviction, even as tension rippled through the room. But Joel's heart ached. Not as a pastor, he understood the necessity of leadership, but as a father watching his son stake everything on his beliefs. The room was silent as Jonathan's gaze met his father's. It was a silent duel between love and principle, between loyalty to family and dedication to truth. Leaders pressed for action, and the decision was brutal. Jonathan had two choices: apologize publicly and recant his statements, or step away from his leadership role. Silence hung heavy. Jonathan's response was immediate. He refused to compromise his principles. Truth, he believed, could never be exchanged for comfort or approval. His stance was unwavering, leaving no room for negotiation. The vote was held, and in that moment, Lakewood Church made its announcement. Jonathan Osteen was removed from his position. Officially, it was a decision framed as mutual, but behind the words lay the weight of disagreement, heartbreak, and unresolved conflict. At home, Sophia Hahn's patience was stretched thin. She confronted Jonathan gently but firmly, warning him of the repercussions for their family, their future, and their place within the church. Jonathan listened, steady and composed. For him, the truth was worth the cost. Even as the walls closed in around him, the loss of position, the strain on family, and the whispers of scandal, he held fast to his convictions. What came next would define not just his role in the church, but the path he would carve for himself. Because stepping away wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter that would challenge everything the world thought they knew about faith, family, and purpose. And Jonathan Osteen's next move would soon shake the foundations far beyond Lakewood Church. A church divided behind the scenes. Leaving Lakewood Church didn't make the questions stop. It only made them louder. Jonathan Osteen stepped into a world full of uncertainty, far from the spotlight of the megachurch his family had built. But he carried with him a vision clear as ever. Faith should inspire humility, serve others, and confront real struggles, not chase wealth or status. His first solo sermon was humble in scale, but monumental in impact. A small town hall replaced the grand auditorium. Yet every word Jonathan spoke carried weight. He challenged conventional thinking, encouraging people to embrace compassion over prosperity, service over personal gain, and truth over comfort. Reactions came fast. Supporters hailed him as a trailblazer, a reformer unafraid to confront decades of tradition. Critics accused him of rebellion, questioning whether he could build anything without the prestige and resources of Lakewood Church. At home, the strain with his father remained. Joel Osteen's disappointment was palpable, yet Jonathan stayed unwavering. Sophia Hahn, ever supportive but cautious, reminded him that purpose sometimes comes with sacrifice. Jonathan knew the path ahead would be lonely, yet it was worth every challenge. Slowly, a following began to grow, small at first, but passionate. People drawn to authenticity, humility, and justice found a new voice in Jonathan. His ideas, once controversial, now sparked discussion and inspired action. This was more than a ministry, it was a movement. And with every sermon, every conversation, every step forward, one thing became clear. Jonathan Osteen wasn't just leaving Lakewood Church, he was redefining what faith could truly mean. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments, like this video, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Don't miss the next video popping up on your screen now.